Hey, this is Lisa Ferris from Soundtrack Your Brand. You're listening to Your Morning Coffee, the podcast with my friends Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart, the essential weekly music news for the new music business.
From Symphonic, the ultimate guide for a kick-ass year 2022.
From Hypebot, music streaming really does pay. You just aren't doing the math right.
Hate math. And from Billboard, should music do more to combat fake streams? We have got so much to talk about. This is episode number 80. It is the Your Morning Coffee podcast. Kick back, relax, and let Jay and I take over the controls. Here we go.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. 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 Standing by. Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
All right, Jay, like every Saturday or like every day we record this show, we have almost another show that we've started just talking about the things we're going to talk about on the show.
Yeah, it's just an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the new music business. There's so much to talk about every week. We actually took off one or two stories from this week because these first three, the only three that we're going to talk about this week, there's a lot to unpack there.
A lot to unpack is an understatement. And, so many of these issues come up, we revisit many things that we've talked about going back to episode number 1. And then when the newsletter comes out, it is chocked full of things and updates and different takes and different spins and different issues. It's every week it is so many things to consider. And again, another reason why I so appreciate your newsletter. Well before we started doing the podcast, it was, there's just so much to digest. And ever since I've known you, you are like the supreme digester. You get every newsletter, you pour over everything that's coming, because that's just the way you are with information. You are like an information magnet. You are the tractor beam for information. And so the newsletter has always been such a wonderful resource because it makes it so much easier to kind of keep up to date. And we need to be up to date. Yeah. There's so many changes, so many things going on.
Yeah, thank you, brother. And when we worked together back in the day at Universal, I remember pulling down articles and sharing them with the team, just that kind of that curator, and I rely on several really great curators to kind of keep me posted. And our listeners are so amazing. Every week I get story ideas or I get, topics from listeners. We talked about Bruno from CAA kind of tipping us off on some of the things that were happening with the Latin market. And it's like standing on the shoulders of giants. I do have publicists that send in, articles, article ideas, topics, and that really helps. The people who listen to the show send in ideas. Mm-hmm. And then just every week visiting some of our favorite sites like Hypebot and Music Business Worldwide and Music Ally. And there's so many great, Variety is really good, Rolling Stone, Billboard. And, I've gotten to know some of those writers a little bit from doing this, which has just been a joy. But just getting those emails, typically they're Friday right after the newsletter comes out. Someone who wrote the piece or somebody the piece was written about, or one of our readers will send me some notes. And it's just a joy every week.
Well, and you mentioned, and we've mentioned this several times over the episodes, basically. So publications like Variety and Rolling Stone, which historically have covered music, but not necessarily the music business, is how many of these publications have really ramped up their coverage of the business, and so it's absolutely remarkable. And it's just which is great. However, it's just more stuff that we have to kind of weed through, and
Well, I like to try to find the people who actually wrote the story because and did the research. There are a lot of people out there that'll take an idea and say, "Oh, well, Rolling Stone wrote this, and this is what I think about it." And that's fine, but I would rather the people who are actually on the earnings calls, the people who, the Glenn Peoples and Sherry Who's and Tim Inghams of the world, Shirley Halpern, those kinds of people who actually do the hard work of digging in and seeing what all of these things mean. I think that is really helpful to get to the heart of the matter, not just someone's opinion about it.
Yes.
I mean, if you want someone's opinion, just listen to this program. We'll tell you what we think.
That's right. Exactly. Let me tell you what I think. And by the way, the guy that I get to chat with every week, he is none other than Jay Gilbert. He and I have been working together for ages. I mean, how long is it? Well, that was 1999 when we connected.
98, 99, right around there. Yeah.
And I don't have your script up for your specifics, Jay.
That's okay. Well, I will tell you that the guy sitting across from me, who's looking for his script, is Mike Etchart, a longtime host of Sound and Vision Radio, formerly of SST Records, Warner Music, Capital EMI, and Universal Music. Mike and I worked in, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but there were two divisions. One was ECAT, Electronic Commerce and Advanced Technology.
Yes.
And then that kind of morphed into E-Labs and something else. But that's around the time you and I started working together.
That's right. And by the way, so I can do this from memory, but Jay, of course, is the founder and creator of the Your Morning Coffee podcast, which is new music news for the new music business. And he is a former executive at Sony Music, at Warner Music, and at the Universal Music Groups. And of course, Fox Home Entertainment was hidden in there for a bit when he did a little sideways boogie over to the film business. And he is a groovy guy, and not just a pretty face, but boy, he works his butt off on the newsletter, and it's just fantastic. And I'm so lucky to get a chance to do this.
Checks in the mail.
Thank you very much. Indeed. And we also, of course, Jay, must mention the folks that get us here, our sponsors. We are so fortunate to have a wonderful group of folks to help us put this on, including the Music Business Association. By the way, the 4-day Music Biz 2022 conference agenda has just been announced, taking place May 9th through 12th at the JW Marriott in Nashville, along with returning favorites like the Metadata Summit, hashtag NextGenNow, DSP workshops, and Brand Summit, to name just a few. You'll find timely new additions for 2022, including conversations on NFTs, gaming and immersive music experiences, catalog acquisitions, and much more. Visit musicbiz.org. Also, don't forget to register for their upcoming live stream, which I think is Wednesday, if the 23rd is Wednesday. Let's Talk Physical, Successes and Opportunities for Physical Music Products. That's going to be 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Big thanks to Music Business Association.
I'll be there.
Yes.
Yeah. Your Morning Coffee podcast is also brought to you by our friends at Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle now powers 60,000 musicians' websites. Built by musicians for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform, makes it super easy to build a beautiful website and an EPK for your music. All the features you need for a professional website, everything's built in. Hosting, custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Commission-free crowdfunding and fan subscription features, mailing list tools to grow your fan list and send newsletters, social media integrations, and live support from their musician-friendly team 7 days a week. Your Morning Coffee podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com, try it for free for 30 days. Excuse me, just use the promo code Morning Coffee, all one word, And that'll get you 15% off your first year of any subscription. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code Morning Coffee. And congratulations to Dave Cool on his promotion over there at Bandzoogle. He's now the Chief Relationship Officer. Richly deserved for our friend Dave Cool.
Yes, aside from having the wonderful name that he does. And by the way, we're also sponsored by Hypebot. Since 2004, Hypebot has chronicled the new music industry and the trends and technologies that are changing how music is discovered, consumed, marketed, and monetized. It is edited daily by founder Bruce Houghton with help from Owen Davis. Hypebot and sister blog Music Think Tank are published by live music discovery and marketing platform Bands in Town.
Speaking of Bands in Town, over 65 million live music fans trust Bands in Town to get personalized concert alerts, recommendations, and messages from their favorite artists. The #1 artist services platform connecting over 550,000 artists with their super fans. Managers, labels, agencies, and artists access their own dashboard to manage and promote their tour dates across all platforms.
Yes, indeed. So big thanks to Music Business Association, Bandzoogle, Hypebot, and Bands in Town. We appreciate it and could not do it without y'all. So big thanks.
We sure do.
Indeed. Well, Jay, let us, after we acknowledge that the Rams won the Super Bowl, let us jump in.
Oh, that's right.
They did. It seemed like that was like 4 weeks ago, and it was really just...
I know. Only last
6
weekend.
days ago, exactly.
Yeah.
For us here on a Saturday. Let's jump into this. And we talk about the resources and how amazing it is right now. It's amazing, yes, but it's also overwhelming. Also, how many great resources are out there for artists, for musicians, for label heads, and from Symphonic, we're going to talk about the ultimate guide for a kick-ass year 2022. And I'm going to pull it up, and oh my God.
Well, as you're doing that, Symphonic has just an incredible team and an incredible blog, and they send out these great tutorials to show people how to do things in the music industry. And each year they do this ultimate guide for a kick-ass year. Last year, I was honored to do a live stream with Randall Foster on their ultimate guide for a kick-ass year 2021. And it was super fun. I have a great deal of respect and admiration for Randall and his team over there. And so this particular thing, you can download it here for free. Mm-hmm. It is just a wealth of information for not just developing artists, but established artists on things that they can do to further their career. Things like, release strategy, physical distribution, how to get your music on TikTok and Triller, etc., lyric distribution, voice strategy, and we'll talk about all of these in a second, sync licensing, publishing, branding, which is what we're going to start with, advertising, and a lot more. And again, this guide is free. Just grab your morning coffee, click that download, grab that PDF, and walk through it. It is one of those things that I print out each year and I make notes on it, and it just kind of reminds you to do certain things. Mm-hmm. So let's start it off. The first one is kind of revisiting your branding, and people don't think of their band or their artistry as a brand, but it certainly is. And you certainly need to think about what your narrative is. Why should anyone care? And they kick off this guide with revisiting your branding. It says the first thing. Oh, hang on a second. Someone's trying to call me. The first thing you can do is look over your current branding and analyze what could have been done better. And we encourage artists and managers to do this usually around the end of the year, to kind of look back at what worked, what didn't work, what is your branding, what is your narrative, right? It says, think about what your branding represents. What do you stand for? Mm-hmm. Why is your branding the way it is? Your branding is an extension of you. Take the time to revisit who your target is meant to be and how you want it to be perceived, then make changes to realign your efforts. And I'll just put a fine point on that by saying that we have this conversation frequently with artists and managers about finding your tribe. Who is your audience? Who do you want to collaborate with? Who do you want to tour with? How do you want to be perceived? And it comes down to everything that you do, whether it's photo shoots, and videos and banner sets and how your website looks and your socials look. And you have to think about those things. What do you stand for? Who are you? And if someone had, 30 seconds in an elevator with somebody influential, what would you want them to say about you? What is that narrative?
Right. As they say, make sure your branding truly expresses who you are. Even just updating your logo to better fit your style could be what draws in more fans in the long run. So it's, and we talk about this a lot too, which is, not only do you need to write great music and write songs that make people cry, right? You need to consider these things. These branding exercises are super valuable, but for a lot of artists, it's not their core strength. And so it's lovely to have this essentially a line listing of things to consider, and it makes it so much easier to have somebody like Symphonic make a lovely resource like this. And it is lovely, and we talk about this as well. Not only is the information fantastic, but it's presented in a way that is not overwhelming, and that's hard to do.
The design is beautiful. They have links to everything in here.
They sure do.
And my friend Mike Brandvold always says that frequently, like maybe it's at the end of your year, you should look over and change all your passwords and look at your website and make sure that all the links work, and look at your across DSPs, look at your imaging and your banners and what you have there, and make sure that it does fit your brand. The next one is they talk about metadata, which metadata can be confusing to people, but it's actually pretty simple. And they have metadata guidelines, a link here that you can go to, and ways to triple and double and triple check your metadata. But metadata includes information like artist, genre, label, song title, album, all of that stuff. But they go on to talk about the 3 types of metadata you need to know about: descriptive metadata, ownership/performing rights metadata, and recommendation metadata. And it's so important that you have accurate metadata, just so the right people get paid, for example, publishing splits, things like that. But it's really crucial to people finding you. Metadata is one of those things that's not super sexy, but they make it really easy to make sure your metadata is correct.
And as they mentioned, once your song is already submitted and out in the world, making changes will be very difficult. So before you submit anything, get a second or even third set of eyes on it, because especially if it's not an area that you're super comfortable. So make sure you kind of, before you send it off into the world, that it's accurate and you've got everything listed in there, because this is your money, and if it's not right, you got some problems. So
we have a great proofreader on our team, and she finds, her name is Emily. She's awesome. She finds mistakes that most people will miss. So you need to have somebody on your team that's got that eagle eye that can look things over and go, that's not right.
Yes.
The next one is offering physical options, and it sounds obvious, but it's really not. I mean, 85% of the business is streaming, and I was talking to Terry Courier from Music Millennium about this one time, and it's frustrating for people who work in indie retail, which built this industry, when artists will put something out streaming only.
Yes.
It's really a slap in the face to a lot of them. When someone goes into one of these stores and says, "Hey, I want to get this new record by so-and-so," and they're like, "Yeah, sorry, that's not available as a CD or vinyl or anything. It's just streaming." So I always recommend that there's a physical counterpart, and that we support our indie retail. And also, it's self-serving, because when you do play live, you've got that merch table, and people can take a souvenir home. So when they talk about offering physical options, they use an example of a company we've talked about before called Crates, Qrates, Crates. And I've had them on the Music Biz Weekly podcast. I've looked into their service. In a nutshell, what Crates does is they help you make vinyl. So they've bought up capacity in all these different markets. So they can, if you're in the United States or Canada or wherever you are, they've got something close by where they've got some capacity to make vinyl for you. And their turnaround times are, fairly quick. I'm talking 15, 16 weeks, which is, a lot less than most places today. So what you do is it's all self-serve. You go in there and you upload your audio, you upload your artwork, and you can even do crowdfunding. So let's say you don't have enough money to press up 100 vinyls, as the kids are calling them. You can put everything in the system, start a crowdfunding campaign, and then once you get to that mark, it'll trigger it and it'll manufacture it. And it's just a really great, I didn't want to make this a commercial for crates, but they talk about crates in their, physical offering here.
Well, and, especially at the major label level and even in the music business in general, we tend to want to do just one thing, one format. And we, you and I have both been involved in not only immersive music and new formats and things like that over the years. And it's like, listen, lots of people like to consume music in different ways. And it's super important to super serve your fan base and be aware that, yes, streaming might be whatever the number is, 75% of your fans. That's the way they want to deal with it. But so you're leaving a quarter of them out if you don't consider even compact discs, CDs, or vinyl, or just other things. And so you've got to be aware that is super important to
100%.
Give everybody something that they want.
Yeah. One of the things they talk about here is they point out, if you have an album that got a lot of attention in the past, give it a makeover, repress it with new packaging, consider a limited edition run with different covers, limited edition art, etc. I've seen some artists who have used the vinyl issues to their advantage. So since they can only get a little bit at a time, they'll make each run a different cover. Or a color, a color variation, and, things like that. And they have a pro tip here, which I love. It says, try offering bundles of merchandise at your shows instead of just individual items. Come up with a deal for vinyl plus sticker plus T-shirt, not just at your shows, but also, D2C, wherever your products are sold. I think it's important to look at bundles. We're doing a set right now where there's 3 different deluxe editions, and I remember working at Warner when we did the Led Zeppelin reissues, and there was like 4 or 5 packages for each one of those releases. One might be the CD DVD. One might, the next one might include a book, and the next one, might have vinyl as well. And you look at to serve your super fans, like you just mentioned a moment ago. There are that group of fans that want everything that you do, and they want to support you, and make sure you have some products for that.
And you and I both worked in catalog divisions of major labels, and that's what that's all about, is continually reminding people about an artist, about a legacy artist, about a new artist, about whatever. And you have to keep refreshing things. That's the most important thing for your catalog. It's like a garden. Yes, you got to plant the things, but you have to continue to water it and nurture it. And if you don't do that, the value of your catalog will decrease.
Yeah. It's another one of the reasons why you need to print out this guide and just kind of mark it up and highlight it and keep it on your desk. They talk about re-releasing things the right way, have songs remixed, release alternate versions, live versions, acoustic versions. We talked about our release cycle with Vintage Trouble, where they did an EP and then did those same songs reimagined, and then those same songs from the next one live. And there's just so many ways that your fans are hungry for what you're doing. And the days of just dropping an album every 18 months or 24 months are over. It's you need to have, it's an always on music industry, we always say, right? And these are some ways where you can exploit, and I mean that in the best possible way, your music and keep your fans engaged.
Yeah. So in speaking of how to maximize your back catalog while working on new releases, which is kind of what we're talking about, they of course mentioned new platforms, and like TikTok, of course, that is such a huge driver these days.
A beast.
For developing artists, for expanding artists, their audience. And boy, if you're not dealing with TikTok in some shape or form, then you're missing really the boat. And they have mentioned here that they've partnered, if you're a client of them, they have partnered with TikTok for various sort of different things. You just got to kind of factor that in, and that is a constant marketing opportunity if you're an artist and you have a catalog and you have art, you're releasing music.
I think there's a misconception about TikTok that it's all about dance challenges and 16-year-old kids, but I'll remind people about things like Fleetwood Mac.
That's right,
being used in a video that blew that up. There are adults on the platform as well, and there are young people that like adult music. And one of the things that you and I learned by working in catalog divisions in the years that we did that is that every year people rediscover John Coltrane, Jimi Hendrix, Bob Marley. These things are, icons in the industry. Miles Davis. I mean, people every year are learning instruments. They're going to high school, going to college, and they're discovering these great artists, these great catalog artists.
But that's not an accident, by the way, because there's people behind the scenes at labels that own those catalogs that are constantly doing things to keep it in the public's consciousness. And so super important to do that for yourself and be aware that that's going on. They mentioned new platforms and formats. Triller. I was stunned when I read this. I mean, we've talked about Triller, but 65 million monthly users are on Triller.
Yeah, and growing.
Yeah. So it's their AI-powered editing format. It makes it easy to produce professional-looking video content all in one place. What a lovely, again, a wonderful resource. If you don't have the time, this is a great thing that to help you get stuff up, and super important.
Yeah. It's a really great platform. There's so many cool tools and platforms. We should do a show just on that sometime, but where you can create, like if you've ever used Canva, there's certain platforms that really help you create, and like Triller, really professional looking assets that you can post online and share for your band and your brand. The next one is lyrics, getting your lyrics out there, which is super important. There's a lot of these DSPs use Music Match, but through Symphonic, they'll make sure that it's on Apple Music, Lyric Mind. But you need to make sure that whoever you're using for distribution, make sure that you're uploading those lyrics as well and that they're accurate.
Yeah. Also, and of course, there's a great link. Speaking of Triller, there's a great link for Triller best practices for musicians. So the great thing about this particular PDF that you can download is it takes you elsewhere if you want to get deep on one of these issues. So the next one they talk about here is how to maximize your back catalog while working on new releases, new platforms and formats. Bandcamp. We talk a lot about Bandcamp. Bandcamp is one of the largest remaining download stores out there. If you have a lot of catalog, throw it on there. It's a great way for you to create bundles and get download revenue directly from consumers.
Yeah,
yes.
Bandcamp is a thing. I've purchased a lot of music on Bandcamp. It's a great music discovery place. Plus, it's got this kind of indie vibe that I like to support. The next one is voice strategy, and I have to be careful what I say because of these smart speakers, shall we say, the Amazon Echo. And all of those, I'm surrounded by every one of them on the market. And the reason for that is when we put out music, I want to say it to these smart speakers and see if they recognize it. And sometimes they don't. And if you have a good distributor, there's a form that you fill out that you tell them what you expected to get and what you actually got as far as that messaging. But listen, a lot of people are listening to music via these things. More and more people at home, in their car, portable devices. It's super important. And what they say in this guide from Symphonic is 71% of consumers prefer to conduct queries by voice instead of typing. What are they using it for the most? Listening to music. As a musician, it's important to be aware of the shift to come and have a voice strategy ready to go. Here's how to do it. And they have this link to how to start developing a voice strategy for your music. It's super important.
They also mentioned DSP management, and boy, that should be highlighted and lit up and everything. And some of the things they talk about here is getting familiar with the data available, and you are the king of data processing. and it's and if you're like me, my eyes just glaze over. Jay gets fired up when he hears about data. I'm the exact opposite, but it's super important, super important because it's your stuff. Amazon, Spotify, Apple, Deezer, Bandcamp, all of these people. There's stuff you can learn from the data, and boy, you have to get familiar with all of it.
Yeah, they talk about, claiming your profiles and what you just mentioned about data. Of course, all of these platforms have kind of a dashboard where you can go in and look at the look at the data. One of my favorite things to do is to look at YouTube analytics. You can look by video and see a chart that shows what the listenership is on that song. And there's this line at 30 seconds because that's where you get paid. But it's so amazing to me watching that decay because nobody has the patience anymore or the attention span to watch a whole video. Typically, when you get to 30 seconds in, you've lost 30+% of your audience, which drives me crazy. But that's why don't bore us, get to the chorus, that sort of thing. But the one thing I wanted to add to this page is that our friend Mike Warner has this book called Work Hard, Playlist Hard, and the new edition is so different than the first edition. They're both good, but the new one takes all of these DSPs and not only shows you how to claim all your profiles, but kind of shows you how to optimize across the board. So I wanted to get a shameless plug in there for Mike Warner and his book because it's such a great asset. And then, when you talk about data, they have a whole page, under DSP management, digital service provider, that's like Spotify and Apple Music, on getting familiar with the data that's available. And they have a great link here to kind of help you with that. Amazon, Spotify, Apple, Deezer, Bandcamp, they talk about, you can use Chartmetric, which is a great platform to, look at how you're trending across socials and streaming. I've been also using this newer platform called Viberate, which does similar things, and it has things like engagement. So you can see if not only is your audience growing, but are they more engaged? I like to say, it sounds pedantic, but do more of what works and less of what doesn't.
Let me write that down. Let me write that down. Hold on. Okay.
Yeah.
Do more
Doctor,
of what works.
Hurts when I do this. Well, don't do that. Anyway, so, and one of the areas, and I'll let you kind of take this one on publishing, one of the areas that I think is so important for distributors is monetization. And Symphonic is so focused on monetization across the board. Whenever you talk to them, you'll figure out really quickly that they look at all of the different revenue streams, all the different ways to make revenue, not just in sales streams and downloads. And I think that's why they are so valuable.
Yeah, and the next one up is super important. And as before I mention this, it has me thinking about another great resource we haven't talked about it for a while, but Donald Passman, who is a legendary attorney in the music industry. He has written a book that's been what version are we on now?
I think it's a 10th.
Yeah,
I think it's on the 10th.
I think it's a 10th edition of it. It's everything you need to know about the music business. And gosh, Jay's going to get his copy right now because there it is. And
10th edition.
Yeah, 10th edition. And it is such a valuable resource for anybody and everybody, whether you're an artist or a label executive, because there's so much to know. And this next one, which is...
let me just interrupt just really quickly, just to finish that thought. This is the 10th edition. The LA Times calls it the Industry Bible, but this is unlike, and I've had every version of his book.
Yes.
Every single one I bought. This one is different.
That's right.
This one really digs into the new music business, all these things that we're talking about, like Roblox and TikTok and Peloton and all of these things that weren't around a few years ago. So again, we're not being paid by Mr. Passman, but we highly recommend All You Need to Know About the Music Business, one of the best books out there.
However, if he does want to send a check to us, we will cash the check, just as an FYI.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
That's right. So one of the things, though, they're talking about is, and rights management, is you need to register, or make sure you are registered with a performing rights organization like ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC. It's crucial because these are the people that make sure you're getting paid every time your song is played. As I say, but don't stop there. You'll also want to look into mechanical royalties, which is the money you make when something is downloaded or sold on, say, iTunes, which ASCAP, CSAC, and BMI don't cover. So there's a wonderful link about learn everything you need to know and more with these helpful resources, which is a copyright crash course, types of publishing deals and how they work, and what you need to know about TV and radio royalties. So there's all kinds of stuff out there that you need to be registered with. We talk about mailbox money, And it's, listen, maybe it's $15, but that's $15 that you're leaving on the table. So don't leave a penny on the table.
Yeah, and I think with publishing, it's a little confusing. To a lot of people. Our business is so nuanced, and not everyone understands mechanicals or publishing. And these guides that we're talking about, especially this overall guide here, how to have a kick-ass year 2022 from Symphonic, they have all these links in here. Everything you need to know is right here, and I'm surprised that this isn't something they're charging for, because it's so valuable, and we highly encourage everyone to download this. They do touch on neighboring rights. So neighboring rights refer to the right to publicly perform or broadcast a sound. Sound recording owners, record labels, artists, collect neighboring rights royalties whenever their sound recordings are publicly performed on satellite radio like Sirius XM, internet radio like Pandora, BBC, cable TV music channels, TV outside of the United States, and terrestrial radio outside of the United States. So that's really important too.
Yep. A lot of great stuff. Wonderful piece by Symphonic. And again, I will tip my virtual hat to them, because it's a lot of work to put these things together, and it's so valuable to their clients and to anybody. But you have to recognize that it takes a lot of people power to put one of these lists together, and boy, good on them, and thank you. So huge resource and wonderful.
And
worth your time.
You and I are we're just scratching the surface.
No, yes.
There's so much more in this. One of my favorite pages in here is about release music best practices, and it has marketing drivers. So we highly encourage you to download this thing, but we could talk for hours just about this one deck.
Yes, indeed. And even stuff like setting up your business entity is mentioned here. So it's super deep, it's super wonderful, and it's free. Did we mention it's free? And it's get cozy with it and really kind of look and see where you are in all of these different areas. It's a wonderful resource.
Yeah.
So big thanks to Symphonic.
Absolutely.
All right, Jay, let's jump over to the next article from Hypebot. Music streaming really does pay. You just aren't doing the math right. And I mentioned, I think at the top of it, Jay, I hate math, so forgive me for not getting the math right. But it's a really interesting article. It's by Anthony Manker.
It really is.
And, this is the narrative. The streaming is evil narrative is doing more harm than good, particularly for independent artists. So he kind of is breaking down some details, and it kind of starts with basically, Neil. Somebody had posted somewhere, maybe on Twitter, or something saying about the Neil Young controversy, and he said, "I'm sure Neil Young will survive without receiving his approximately $10 monthly streaming royalties from Spotify." Well, yeah, not exactly. So Anthony writes, for the record, Neil Young's catalog earns about 13 million streams per month on Spotify alone, which is just a little under $45,000 per month. So, well, now you have my attention, Mr. Math. That is, so there are artists that are making a lot of money on Spotify from streams. Not everybody does, but as we jump into the economics of music streaming, it is not insignificant for certain artists.
Right. And it's what this article points out is just the other side of the argument, because we hear constantly streaming is ripping off artists, or they usually poke at Spotify and pick on them and say Spotify is they're ripping off the artist. Well, I've never really felt that, although, are they perfect? No, and we'll go into that in a second. But that narrative is just so easy to say. But, he talks about the article from the New York Times. It was streaming saved music. Artists hate it. And it claims that, quote, the losers are the 99% of artists who aren't at Beyonce's level of fame. And he says this is really a vast oversimplification. And there was an article recently in Rolling Stone that claimed that streaming has widened the income disparity between smaller and bigger artists. This one does contains some nuance, but mostly misses the point. It regurgitates commonly held harmful beliefs about music streaming. Streaming services don't share what percentage of streams come from editorial playlists, but our guess is somewhere around, a lot.
Right. But, everything when you talk about streaming is, you and I started growing up in bands, started playing in bands when we were young. And, in those days, there were gatekeepers. If you want, for the most part, you could certainly release your own album. And there was lots of independent labels. But for the most part, you kind of had to get the attention of a label if you wanted to get your music out there. There are no gatekeepers anymore. And when there are no gatekeepers, there is just a flood of music being uploaded. So should the kid that just created something in GarageBand that may or may not be that may or may not be a great song, should they really be making the same amount of money that Beyonce is? Of course not. They shouldn't be. But and the number that we talked about, are we at 70,000 a day, give or take, of new music being uploaded to Spotify and the other DSPs? You're talking about a insane flood of music out there, and so many tracks never get played, not a single time. So, it's the music business has always been, the domain, like anything, of a few artists are able to make a fabulous living, and
always been
that way. And so he mentions in the article, he says Spotify is paying out almost 75% of its revenue to rights holders, and they say it has never been profitable. But I was kind of curious, and we talked about this before we came on. I'm like, okay, that means they're still holding on to 25% of profit, of revenue. And so I'm like, I wonder what's their profit margin? And so, because that's a similar, vibe. And the most recent number I saw for Netflix from the last quarter of 2021 was a profit margin of about 17%, which is the highest it's ever been. And I attribute that to the fact that they're creating their own content. There's lots of content that Netflix now has that they own. But if you go back just a year or two, they never really got above a 10% profit margin.
Wow.
So when we talk about Spotify enjoying a 25% profit margin, that's pretty substantial considering they own none of the content. And you mentioned that their offices in New York are quite extravagant. And so,
And let's break down that 75%. For those who are, keeping track, it's 74.42, but let's just call it 75%. And that includes, around 63% roughly that goes to the rights holders, typically the label, and then about 10% that goes to the songwriters via the publishers. And if you've listened to this show, we've talked about this a lot, that 10%, the NMPA is pushing that to be 20% through the Copyright Royalty Board proceedings right now, while Spotify and these other DSPs are really pushing to keep that at 10%. It was agreed that it would go to 15% at the last CRB, but that's still being, they're still fighting over that. They're contesting that. So, when you talk about how much Spotify or any DSP, not to pick on Spotify, if they're taking 25%, that doesn't sound like a lot, but to your point, compared to other industries, that's a lot, and maybe they should be paying more to the songwriters that actually created it. And the other thing that you and I always talk about is people kind of miss the point of, it's not just about that payout of that third of a penny or whatever. It's about the value it creates for the company.
Yes.
How much is that company worth? How much, I'd read that I think Daniel Ek is worth like $3.8 billion or something like that. And that's something we need to consider as well.
Yes. And as this fight goes on, given Spotify's challenging situation with Neil Young and with the Joe Rogan thing, it would be a great time for them to come out and say, you know what, we're going to pay the publishing, we're going to go with the 15%, like it was put into place last year or whenever that was. They have a wonderful opportunity to do the right thing when it comes to some of these things, and they are not taking advantage of that, and that's very disappointing. Right. Very, very, very disappointing.
Yeah, and to be fair, this article really isn't saying that. It's really more saying that you're misunderstanding the math here. Artists are paid, a 15 to 25% royalty after costs and deductions are recouped. So when we say that this money is paid to the rights holders, unless you're an indie artist, typically that's going to your label, and you're making 15 to 25% of that. People often fail to mention that sometimes there's 6 and 7 figure advances for those artists, which are paid when they sign their deal, and that's in exchange for handing over their masters. So complaining about payouts without considering these deals is neglecting a crucial aspect of the situation and contributes to the false narrative. I think that's fair.
It's fair. Yeah, it is. And he kind of breaks down, when we talk about what artists are making, there's different classes of artists. There are major label artists, and those artists, as you mentioned, they're not making the full amount, and it's being recouped based on advances and things like that. You've got you've got artists that might be licensing product to major labels, but then there's also the growing class of, as I say, purely independent artists, and that there are artists that have a catalog that can make up to $3,000 to $6,000 per month, which is not insignificant amounts of money. It's money to live on, potentially, depending on where you live. So that is happening, and
it's increasing, right?
Yeah.
He says that the number of artists earning $50,000 a year has been consistently going up over the last 3 years. And his argument is that there's never been a greater opportunity in the music industry for an artist to release their own music and earn a livable income directly from it. And I really enjoyed this article, but where it really gets good, and we won't go too deep into it, is when you get into the comments section.
Yes.
Former, CEO of TuneCore, the founder and former CEO, Jeff Price, his responses, he says things like, I'm just going to read a couple of lines out of this because it's a long response, but it's really interesting. He says Spotify pays no royalties at all for a trial subscriber, but Spotify reports the trial subscriber in its public filings, thereby increasing its share price. Now, we've been talking about that a little bit, that this market share is really what they're after, and that affects their stock price. And he says it in his response, that Spotify's value is not predicated on profit, it's based on market share. And he says that the problem is that the interests and goals of Spotify are not aligned with the artists and labels. Yeah. Spotify makes money off market share, whereas artists and labels make money off the sale or license of their music. There's so much in here to kind of unpack. And I do want to look at this a little more carefully, and there's some other things that we can talk about, but I also want to touch on another article that I put right alongside of this in your morning coffee, which we'll talk about in a second, from Rolling Stone, where David Macias from 30 Tigers is interviewed, and the headline is, "Vilification is easy. Spotify isn't the culprit," says head of indie label 30 Tigers. So I'd like to dig into that a little bit as well, but let's continue talking about this Hypebot piece that was written by Anthony Manker of Group Projects, because there's still a little bit more to unpack.
Yeah, and there's a lot of back and forth if you look at the comments below between the author and folks that kind of commented on it. So it's it's really challenging. Well, I will also kind of talk about it. We were talking about gatekeepers a second ago and how there really aren't any gatekeepers. But then he mentions here a note on gatekeepers and editorial playlists. He says human curated editorial playlists are sometimes used to support the assertion that music streaming services are just new forms of the age-old problem with music industry gatekeepers. They are portrayed as the new power brokers that contribute to disparity in the music marketplace. But he's saying that the influence of these playlists is greatly overestimated, which has caused a general obsession within the industry with getting music placed on them. Now, truer words have not been spoken, that right line, because we were talking about this before we got on, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more, which is, you know, the proliferation of fake streams because the obsession with getting music on playlists. He said it's true that some playlists do have massive audiences and can generate significant amounts of streaming activity. However, most of the streaming activity in healthy artist profiles tend to come from algorithmic recommendations and engaged fan bases, not decisions made by human curators.
Let me interject there, because that is the most important thing that I read in this entire piece. And it's true, because I'm looking at like maybe 25 artists across the board, and I would say on average, over a quarter of the spins are coming, if we're talking about Spotify only over a quarter of those spins are coming from their, what I call personalized playlists. Some people call them algorithmically curated playlists, Discover Weekly, Release Radar, Radio, some of those. Some of my artists, like half of their plays are coming from that. So that line that you just read, I think is super important to this piece.
Yeah. So again, I love that phrase. It's talking about a healthy artist profile, and he says that is one that is not over leveraged by editorial playlists, i.e., it does not overly rely on editorial playlists for streaming activity. He says anything above 25% of streams from editorial playlists start to become questionable and unsustainable. So, you know, but that's a hard conversation to have, because what does every artist, every manager tell you? I want to be on more playlists, right? And it's a problem.
But you have to ask the question. Whenever a manager will say to me, you know, I want to be on these playlists, my question typically is why, right? Because some of these playlists you're only on for a week, sometimes 2 weeks, and then you're done. A playlist is not a marketing plan, you know, like we say. But once in a while, I'll get someone who will say, well, I want my artists on New Music Friday. And I'll say, well, what artists at your level are on New Music Friday? Right? Assuming that the song is amazing. But you have to kind of look at playlists holistically. There are user-curated playlists, and there's lots of them, and I would rather be on a whole bunch of user-curated playlists than just one big Spotify-curated playlist. And the thing about playlists, if you're not in the first 15 tracks, you know, a lot of that engagement goes way down. You know, it's more of a lean-back experience. So I do want to touch just quickly on that piece in Rolling Stone about that they interviewed David Macias. He's the owner and co-founder of the Nashville-based label services company 30 Tigers. He's been frustrated by what he sees as a lopsided conversation, scapegoating Spotify as the lone nefarious corporate giant in the music industry. He says that on the whole, at 30 Tigers, a general rule of thumb is that their artists earn 75% of the gross. We split the remaining 25% with the Orchard, who's our distributor. Last year we did about $36 million in sales, and 10 to 12% of that we keep, and that's how we pay our staff, right? And keep the lights on. They have 27 people that work there. We go out there and act as a label would on behalf of an artist, but we allow the artist to keep ownership of their work. So they keep the masters after that term is over. The artists, they're kind of their own label. And, any expense or advance comes out of the 75% that the artist earns. But because they are their own label, there are lots of ancillary revenues that can flow to them. Merch, sync placements, that goes directly to them. And he says if an artist streams 1 million times, they should get around $4,000, and that's in line with what you and I typically say. It's between $3,000 and $5,000, depending, on the month and the platforms. And even though it seems like 1 million streams is a ton, last month 45 of their 100 artists streamed over 1 million times, right? And some considerably more than that. So Spotify is currently the scapegoat for the ills of the working class artist, despite them paying, what we just described, 63% to the rights holders and 10%, which should be higher, to publishers. So is Spotify perfect? No, far from it. He says, do I wish, Spotify wasn't joining the other DSPs and appealing that copyright royalty board ruling? Yeah, absolutely. But in a country where business failure rate is 65% over 10 years, should artists be immune from their businesses failing? Yeah, vilification is easy, right? He's heard that from people, and that the system is broken. But he kind of counters that with this piece in Rolling Stone, and I know he took a lot of heat for that. But I think there's a song by Ricky Warwick where he sings, "There's three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth." Right? And I think we've been kind of looking at one side of this argument a little bit too much, and now we're getting some things on the other side. And I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I don't think that Spotify is the bad guy, but they are fighting paying publishers more.
Yeah.
They're certainly increasing the value of their executives and their company.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Well, it's something we will cover again and again and again. So great article, worth checking out. Yeah. And let's grab the last one, Jay, which is from Billboard. Should music do more to combat fake streams? And this is by Micah Singleton, and as the subline is, it's dishonest artists stealing from honest artists, and that's a huge problem.
It's a huge problem. We talk about this all the time. Dustin Boyer and Maddie Elise, from Shark Attack. And Dustin were two of the first people to kind of shout from the rooftops, that I started reading about not only how you can tell if your artists have been botted, but how rampant this is. And there was a great piece in Rolling Stone that you and I covered where they captured a recording of a Zoom conversation with a manager, a playlisting platform. How do you say that? It's a playlisting promotion platform where they were essentially saying, we're going to get you millions of streams. And it's absolutely rampant right now. And they're starting to write more about it. This particular piece that you mentioned is part of Plugged In, which is a Billboard column, which is pretty cool. This week, they talk about how streaming fraud is still a critical issue in many countries around the world. Some of the countries are actually doing something about it. Recently, Brazil did something about it. Germany, they're cracking down on these bots and spin farms and these platforms that are making money off the backs of all these other artists, because remember, it's not a victimless crime.
Well, and let's review what it really is. So, essentially, let's say you've got a computer sitting in your living room, and you're an artist. You've uploaded to all the DSPs, and you take that computer and you start listening to your song over and over and over and over and over again. So that's essentially what we're talking about. That can be scaled to much larger, a lot more computers and things like that, but it's people gaming the system. And the reason it's theft, of course, is because there is a finite pie every month of money that can go out to artists whose music is being listened to on Spotify or on any DSP. And if it's being artificially pumped up like that, by that, then you are taking money from people whose songs are legitimately being played and listened to by humans. But not, we worked in the business for a long time, and you saw it in radio. You saw these things are not new, and people are looking for that leg up. But it's an issue, and the number, when you talk to different people, it's different opinions on how big of an issue it is, but everybody agrees it's big, and it is a real problem.
I think now, it is, and I think now major CEOs are starting to speak up. A lot of them aren't going on the record, and not in this piece, but they're talking about CEO. One of them, says it's really more of the major labels that are paying these firms to do it, and it's usually like 2 or 3 degrees disconnected, and they want they want that to be the case.
Sure.
You know, label will hire a legit agency, and then that legit agency outsources a piece of the marketing spend to maybe not so legit agency. I get decks every week, pitches from playlist promotion companies that say, for X amount of dollars, I will get you this many streams or likes or follows or whatever. And in the beginning, it was kind of a small thing. Now it is becoming a big thing. And there are companies out there. In fact, I'm meeting with one next week, which I'll talk about later, that's combating this, identifying it, finding out where the sources are. If you use data platforms like we do, and it's pretty easy to see when someone's been botted. You know, Maddie at least has a great article that you can find if you Google it on how to tell if your account's been botted. But I always look at audience growth versus engagement. And that's why I love that platform Viberate, because they have a whole section just on engagement. And so you can see how your audience is growing during a release cycle, but then right below it, what's happening with your engagement. Yeah. And if you get, you know, and I see this all the time, like on Spotify for Artists, for example, I'll see the number of spins are chugging along at, let's say, 500, or so a day, 500. Then all of a sudden it goes to 10,001, 10,003, 10,001 again, like almost to the number 10,000 for, let's say, a week. Then it drops back down to that 500, 500, 500. Sure. That's a red flag to me, because it's not typical behavior to have those numbers be like that. And frankly, I've let artists know, look, you've been botted. And typically what I found is that they've hired a publicist or a radio promotion person, and a lot of their business has been taken away because people are saying, well, listen, I need to put my money into playlist promotion. So they're like, oh, well, I can do that. Yes. And they will hire some white label to do that. So, I will be talking about this more in the coming weeks, but it is a massive, massive problem, these fake streams. Yeah.
And I mean, is your sense that the major labels truly want to limit? I mean, listen, the what you don't want to happen is for Spotify to recognize that it's being gamed and then take your music down. So ultimately,
which they've done.
And my guess is they will continue to do that. Well, it's sort of two-part questions. Do the majors really want that changed? A, and then the second question is, why couldn't the DSPs be a lot more aggressive in this space than they are?
Yes, I think those are great questions. The first one about labels is yes and no. It depends what your job is at the label. Yeah. If you're the CFO, you want this stuff to end right now. If you're promoting an artist and, it's, all's fair in love and war, you're going after that. You need that artist to succeed any way possible. And it's not just the initial, let's say, those fake streams. It's kind of starting that fire is what they're looking at. So if they get millions of streams for an artist, well, then these algorithms at these DSPs might pick that up and say, oh, this thing's actually happening here, so we're going to add it to these. It's a self-fulfilling kind of thing. And then they can say, oh, well, we've crossed this many, and this artist is legit because of this. So yes and no on the label side. What was the second question? I'm old.
Couldn't the DSPs be far more aggressive than they are in clamping down on this? I think I don't. It's not transparent what Apple Music, Deezer, Amazon. I haven't read much about what they're doing to combat it. Although I'm sure they are. Spotify at the beginning of the year, you and I reported on it, took down thousands and thousands of songs that they could tell. We're using bots and spin farms. So I think they, at least in the press, seem a little bit more aggressive than most. Typically, these things come from free tiers, and typically they come from certain countries. So it's fairly easy for them to look at their data and see how this is going. But to answer your question in a broader context, I think that as an industry, we need to be unified and go after this in a big way and shut it down. Mike Warner on LinkedIn this last week was talking about do not pay for streams. Yep. Don't do it. And we've said that at Label Logic for years. There's never a case where it's a good idea.
At worst, you're going to get your music pulled down off the DSPs. But even if you don't, those aren't real fans. They're not going to buy a T-shirt. They're not going to, come see you live. It's not worth it.
No, not worth it. Not worth it. All right. On that note, Jay, we need to wrap up episode number 80. I want to thank everyone for listening in today. We also want to thank the Music Business Association, Bandzoogle, Hypebot, and Bands in Town for making it happen for us, because we could not do it without them. And my good friend Jay and I certainly recognize that everyone who listens has many other choices to listen to, and we appreciate that you land with us. We never take that for granted. So big thanks. Yep. And thanks for joining us this week. We'll be back next week with episode number 81. On the Your Morning Coffee podcast.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.